May 9th, 2022. We'll begin this evening's Committee on Ways and Means with continued review of the FY23 operating budget. I'd ask you all to please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You can remain standing. We have sad news this evening to share that Clerk of the Council, Sue Cimino's mom, Jean Penny, has passed away. And we'd like to ask for a moment of silence in her memory, as well as the memory of those who have served this country in armed forces and in public safety. Thank you. Please be seated. Okay. Clerk Casey, if you would please take the roll call.
Councilor Reynolds.
Here.
Councilor Clarity.
Here.
And Councilor Maglio.
Here.
All present and accounted for.
Thank you. Okay. There are no approval of minutes this evening, nor do we have any old business. So tonight's focus will be on Order 22025, fiscal year 2023 operating budget. So do we have a motion to move this off the table?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Thank you, and good evening to everyone who's here. Chief of Staff Taub.
Good evening, Chairman Reynolds.
Director Spellman. Town Auditor.
Good evening.
McGoldrick. And all of the other department heads and chiefs who are here this evening. So, I'd like to open it up, give you the opportunity to open up Chief of Staff.
Thank you. Good evening, Chairman Reynolds, members of the committee, Clerk Casey. Nice to see everybody. Hope you had a nice weekend. We are here this evening. I think first item on the agenda is golf. And just as a very small refresher, golf is one of our enterprise funds, which means it is in effect self-sustaining. We also have, as part of the golf budget, 2 revolving funds. The detail in the golf budget can be found in your books at Appendix H, and the revolving funds specifically before you this evening relate to operation of the Pro Shop and food service. Food service is a new revolving fund that was created last year, and I know that Director of Golf Operations, Darren Brown, is here with us this evening, and he can provide a bit of an update as to how those operations have been going. He also provided, and the committee should have received last week, a summary of the changes to the golf budget, including the transfer of some of the expenses in order to place them in a more appropriate account based on the work or affiliation they have with the golf course, as well as a spreadsheet going line by line explaining the adjustments up or down in the golf budget. And so, with your permission, Chairman Reynolds, I would invite, we have Darren Brown with us, we have the Director of the Department of Public Works, which is the umbrella within which golf falls. Right here, Darren, that's good. Assistant Director Ben Hulk and Rob DeVito with us this evening as well. The team more than equipped to address any questions the committee may have this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and welcome all, and welcome Mr. Brown. Good to see you again.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So we will start off, what would you like to start with, the revolving fund or the operating budget itself?
Revolving fund's pretty quick and easy. There's no changes to the amount, so I can talk us through that.
Please, feel free.
The Pro Shop revolving fund is it's a set of 150, right? 200. The Pro Shop revolving fund we increased last year to 200, and that encompasses revenue that we take in from the sale of merchandise, golf lessons, golf clinics, and that's it. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, yes, those are the only items in there. They are in a revolving fund because if we have a great year selling merchandise or we have clinics, juniors or women's clinics that are very popular, like they are this year, we are able to access additional funding to pay staff and increase the number of clinics we have or to replenish merchandise stock in the pro shop that gets sold. We did increase that level last year based on sales and how busy our clinics were. So that end has been going well.
Okay. All right, thank you. We appreciate that brief summary. So I'm going to give an opportunity to the committee members to ask some questions, and first up will be Councilor Flaherty.
Thank you. I always like to hear about golf because you always have good news, or lately you've had good news.
Lately, yes.
Where so much of other news has not always been so good. But golf has had a good run in the last couple of years. And one of the things that we changed has to do with the food and beverage revolving fund.
Yes.
And I see that that's doing very well, which is great news.
Yes.
And the only thing I'm checking on is that it seems like you're taking a portion of your lighting, your electrical bill, the water and sewer costs, credit card fees. Those have been reduced in the golf budget because they're going to be absorbed by the food and beverage revolving fund?
Yes.
Okay. And I assume that's totally kosher and fine. Everybody's okay with that?
So you can actually, Councilor Flaherty, you can transfer any expenditures associated with the operation of the food and beverage service. So if it requires utilities, if it incurs fees related to credit cards, any of those associated costs, along with the personnel costs and the benefit costs that go along with running the service, can be expenditures out of the revolving fund.
I can certainly see how food and beverage requires electrical and water and credit card fees. Are all of the fees for the golf course in those categories coming out of this revolving fund, or are you able to parse it?
I parsed it looking at the history of credit card usage for the food and beverage operations. We can kind of pull those numbers out, and then looking at what our budget number is for credit card fees. I think this year it was about 29,000, and we're still continuing to go up with usage overall of credit cards. But I estimated based on her sales from the previous fiscal year that she was going to incur about $6,000 in those charges. And so I felt it was appropriate to shift those over to the revolving fund instead of having the general golf budget subsidize those fees. There was a concern in the beginning when we created the revolving fund for food and beverage that food and beverage would help support the rest of the operation of golf, as it seems to be fairly consistent. And so we're making an effort to have food and beverage share in the equitable amount of expenses that they're going to incur. So we have 6 HVAC units in the clubhouse, and food and beverage is responsible for 4 of them. So that's why we shifted a portion of the electric. With their dishwasher, they're using a lot more, so the water and sewer bill, they're going to cover a portion of that. I know when we discussed setting up the enterprise fund, Nicole had said, anything related to even the salary and benefits of the food and beverage manager are applicable to being passed off to the revolving fund. And so we've done that with healthcare as well. Her portion of what would be paid for healthcare is being moved over to the revolving fund as well. So it's really self-sustaining and also helping with the general golf budget, but really the shift was given with analysis of how much they're really using and consuming. So it's been a bright spot, the food and beverage.
I think that's great, and I'm glad to know that you can parse it because it makes sense for the revolving fund to cover all the things that are associated with that aspect of the golf experience. So, yay, I'm glad it's working. Those are all the questions I have for that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilor Flaherty, and any questions from Councilor Maglio, please?
Yes, I do have a couple of questions. So as the newest person here, I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
To just make sure my understanding is correct. We were just talking about that revolving account, but all of these expenses are encased in a larger enterprise account.
Yes.
So the proposed 1.753 million for next year that it will cost to operate the golf course is based on all of the funds raised from the golf course and those who are using it.
The 1.7 does not include the food and beverage or the pro shop revolving fund. That's just the 1.7 is for the general golf operations budget.
Okay. So the money that we were just talking about through food and beverage also works that same way?
Yes, and I apologize for not getting over to the food and beverage after speaking about the pro shop revolving fund of 200. The food and beverage revolving fund is 450,000, so we can spend up to a maximum of 450,000.
Okay, so that's 450 and the pro shop is 2. So it's basically the 1.7 million plus the 450 and the 200.
Yes.
Okay. So I think that's so important for people to know that when they see discussions about spending at the golf course and improvements at the golf course, that people understand that what the nature of the enterprise funds are. So I wanted to just kind of review that because it's certainly something that was new to me and good to hear. I do know that in the past, and I think this is what's come up a few times and why people are asking me questions about it, because there was a point in time where there was some amount of money, I think it was less than 100, maybe even less than 50,000. I'm not sure that was used to help make the end of year goals meet. But that is not something that's happened since 2019 maybe, or 2018, or?
I would have to look that up. I think it was, we are now in 2022. I'm thinking, well, so with the close of COVID, and that was FY20, we had a significant shortfall because the golf course was closed with COVID, due to COVID. And so we were short a significant amount. I think it was in the $300,000 range, and we had to apportion off 3 annual payments, and we've paid back 2 of those with our FY21 receipts, which were record-breaking for us, thank goodness.
So that is also new information to me, probably not to others, but just for those who it's new to. The payment, you're saying the loan or the payment that was made from the town fund was about 300,000, and you've paid back about 200,000?
Yes, Ed, those are ballpark numbers, but I think we're close. Yes.
As a result of COVID, the golf course did have a deficit. Governor Baker, in his legislation, allowed for utilities like the golf course to take that deficit and pay back that deficit over a 3-year period, similar to what we had done several years ago with the large snow deficit. It allowed communities to take the deficit and amortize it and pay it back over a 3-year period. So we had adopted it. We went to the council. They agreed. We took the deficit, paid back a third in fiscal 20, a third in 21, excuse me, a third in 21, a third in 22, and a third in 23.
That's fantastic. So then, thank you for that. That's helpful. So then really you're actually raising more revenue than what it costs to operate it.
FY21, we closed with a surplus of about 400,000, and then we used about 200 of that to make the first 2 payments, replenishing the money that Ed was just speaking about. So we came off a great year, and we're hoping to close out this fiscal year in great shape as well.
That's excellent. Those are really my questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Okay. So just a few questions I have, just from a numbers perspective, you could give me some insight. And this first question may be directed perhaps to Director Spellman. The pension fund we see that's gone up 10%. 10%. Can you just tell me what is that part of inflation? Is it part of your, is there a catch-up? Is there, not in concession catch-up, but actually catch-up
I do believe, well, I know 2 employees are getting step increases, and there was a reclassification for the food and beverage manager.
Mm-hmm.
So those are reflected in the new pension numbers that came out.
With the food and beverage manager, you're carrying that in?
Ed could probably better speak to that. Next year, when we submit to retirement board, we'll see if we can break out what the pension would be for the food and beverage manager and have that supported by the food and beverage revolving fund for the next year. It's tough to go back and have them redo the formula and pull that particular one out, but we were able to at least get the health care out of there this year.
Okay.
So that's on next year's
Right.
Next year's.
Well, thank you for that explanation. I'll certainly direct to Spellman.
The pension appropriation is set by TERAC, and we take that total. It's broken out to the various enterprise funds, BELD, water, sewer, golf, stormwater. And in allocating the enterprise funds, what we do is take everything but BELD and allocate it based on a payroll allocation. We take I believe it's an October 1st payroll of the actual payrolls, the members of the retirement system. And with that actual cost, we allocate the pension appropriation to the enterprise funds based on the employees in the systems at the time. And I believe last year we had started hiring some stormwater employees. So when we get to the stormwater budget, you'll see a large increase in the stormwater budget pension appropriation line item.
Okay, but as it pertains specifically to the golf enterprise, what's the term you're using to differentiate between golf and concessions from an official description?
Personally, I think of it as the golf general budget and then food and beverage revolving and then pro shop revolving is how in my brain I sort the two.
So this would be the last item based on your earlier explanation. This particular line item will be one of the last housekeeping items from an accounting standpoint to move them over to the food and beverage. Or is this representative of everything?
Correct. No, he'll move her pension portion over to the food and service revolving fund next year.
Okay, thank you. Perfectly clear. I appreciate those clarifications. I see that the transfer to the general fund is down 12% over last year. Is there some kind of a little explanation, some color to that?
The indirect costs, we do an allocation, again, based on a portion of the town general fund services. We allocate a portion of the general government, the finance office, portion of treasurer collector's office that collects the funds, deposits them, generates and pays the bills, a portion of accounting and the other offices.
Okay.
And with the general fund budget being down over the last couple of years, the allocation has also been coming down.
Got it. Okay, thank you. All right, moving on then to golf equipment and maintenance. Improvements, $50,000. That was last year, and this year you have zero. For the benefit of the committee, last year's $50,000, I mean, this was outside of capital spending for improvements.
So for the improvement budget, it's really for putting new sand in the sand bunkers, trying to rebuild a sand trap, trying to fix a tee. Last year we did a huge landscape project just off the back deck of the clubhouse.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, we have to dig into that account sometimes to help us. We have an infrastructure issue where a large irrigation main may break, and we have to do some repairs. It really is slated for improvements, and the majority of it goes to that, but occasionally we're using it to help out with an infrastructure issue, if need
Great.
be.
And right now, overall, from an infrastructure standpoint, I mean, you've run this enterprise, this golf course operation very well through the years, Mr. Brown.
Thank you.
And there has been some, what I believe to be some very innovative, market related value adds that you've created that has all, when you put them all together, these various efforts, you have seen an increase in your operating revenue, outside of weather, of course, and the impacts of perhaps the reservoir being adjacent to some of those holes.
Or some of those holes being the reservoir.
Between what you've been able to generate for funds from the new space in the clubhouse, function space, winter operations that generate, and then of course overall I think this food and beverage enterprise or portion of your operations has really taken off, and it's been a great value add to your bottom line.
Yes.
So,
thank you.
going forward, are there any, this is more out of curiosity and not, just kind of thinking over the next few years from a improvement perspective, are there anything that might be on the horizon?
Well, the big want is an irrigation system. Ours is incredibly old, but that's a huge capital undertaking for us, and I don't think revenue-wise we can support that at this point. So we're kind of working with putting Band-Aids on areas that we need to. I think this year just focusing on the small stuff, making sure we have good sand in our sand traps and making sure our cart paths are decent, where it keeps our carts in good shape, and doing a couple small projects here and there, rebuilding a tee or adding on some sprinklers in areas that we don't have any. That seems to give us more bang for the buck, and based on golfer feedback, it certainly seems the direction we want to continue until we get to a point where our retained earnings is at a level where I'm not going to lose sleep at night, and that we can make some more significant investments in the golf course itself. In prior years, we've done an entire forward tee system. We rebuilt the fourth hole. We rebuilt the second hole. So we've been able to undertake a lot of capital improvements. As you know, the back deck, the new addition to the golf course, was taken out of retained earnings when we were doing well. And so I'm hoping once we get that account up and getting it strong, that we can certainly look at doing some larger projects. But based on golfer feedback, I think taking care of the little stuff that doesn't cost a ton of money really seems to get us more bang for the buck from our clientele.
Great. So, I mean, you bring value. Obviously, that brings the customers. It's a beautiful course. So, the function room itself, function space, does that fall underneath the golf course operating, or in the food and beverage?
That falls under food and beverage just because they occupy it and run it, but it is still part of the clubhouse, which we run in general. Basic maintenance of that part of the building is covered under building repairs budget of the general budget, but if there's something significant or something new or something innovative we need, then the food and beverage revolving fund has funding that can help us move that forward. But it's been a wonderful space. We have an event almost every single weekend through the golf season.
And the revenues from those functions, are they shared across the overall golf operations?
They go into the revolving fund, and they stay there. But when the revolving fund gets to a certain level, we do have some improvements that we need to do there. She really needs a new stove. She needs some equipment there. At some point, we need to possibly look at a small kitchen expansion, and there's talk of maybe expanding the deck. So we're trying to get that particular revolving fund healthy enough so that we could make a longer-term commitment to doing some improvements.
That sounds good. That's a good approach, I think.
Chairman Reynolds,
yes.
if I could just jump back to something that you mentioned, the improvements line, and I thought I heard you say that was at 0 for this year. I just want to, if it's
level funded.
Yeah, so the turf maintenance program has an improvement
I'm
line.
sorry, it was the other way around. Thank you. You're correct.
I just wanted to make sure.
Thank you.
Level funded at 50. Great. Thank you.
I was thinking that through as I was hearing the explanation. I don't think I said that correctly. So.
I get nervous. I had plans for that money.
Okay, thank you. And then just lastly, and this leads into your recent answer, as part of your recent answer in the golf cart lease expense itself. We know that this year you've seen an uptick of 39%, and you've provided the explanations in your summary, the types of golf carts, and these golf carts are, excuse me if I didn't get it in the summary, gas operated?
Yes.
Okay.
Gas. We would really like to go electric at some point.
And I understand why, that it's the length of the course and the technology that's made available for you to be able to have with reliability. You're not going to abandon or strand some golfer or group of golfers if the power runs out.
Yeah, there's some limitations on them right now. I think the biggest limitation right now is housing all the golf carts. Right now we house a third of our fleet outside, and they all have to be plugged into chargers. Yeah. And sadly, the golf course is subjected to small but regular acts of vandalism almost on a weekly basis, and those chargers, which are incredibly expensive, would be just unplugged and stolen. So I have made a commitment that this year we're going to try and maybe get a design and possibly some cost estimates on what it would cost to increase the size of our golf cart facility and to enlarge it to hold the entire fleet so that we could go electric at some point in the future, and that might involve some capital bonding, but at least get the process started and have some numbers that we can work off of with discussion for the future. Electric golf carts have come a long way, and the last 3 years they just came out with Tesla-type batteries for the golf carts. So you actually are able to get multiple rounds per day on a single charge, which you can't always get now with the old school lead-acid batteries that are in there. So I think the technology, and if we can get the storage thing worked out for our next lease, we certainly will be, I think we should be able to do electric.
Great. Well, I mean, that's hopeful. I'm glad to hear that. Please refresh my memory. I don't have my
That's okay.
I don't have my capital plan items with me. Was golf carts an item listed?
We have been entering in since 2008 a five-year lease appropriation that comes out of the regular golf operating budget, and we do an annual lease payment based on a 5-year lease. And so this year the 5-year lease is up, and we've entered into a new lease for another fleet for the next 5 years.
But that was not a capital request.
No,
it was just listed but not approved or funded.
Yes.
In this year's capital submission.
Yeah, and it's always been an operating budget item.
Got it. Thank you. All right. And then just lastly, expenses and revenues from your food and beverage. How long now, let me think, that food and beverage, has stood up on its own now about 4 years?
18, I think we started.
Yeah, about 4 years.
We started 18,
yes.
18, 19, 20.
5 years, you're in your 15th.
Yeah. So,
okay. And how are you as a percentage of revenues over expenses? The reason I ask is I know that there isn't any information here shared on this where you're now transitioning. Okay, we don't have any kind of an expense. It's blanks where you're starting. This is the stake in the ground, if you will, for beverage,
sure.
Food and beverage. Can you give the committee a sense of how that revenue compared to expenses is working over the last couple of years, and maybe your expectation for the season coming up?
So prior to that, just for the education of the rest of the members, is we had always outsourced our food and beverage up until 2018, and we were getting a lease payment of about $35,000 a year, and certainly not getting the service that we had been hoping for. So when we took it in-house, the expectations was anything in that area or above was going to be a win-win. And I would have to get the final numbers from Ed, but I think that we were at least double that after last year for FY21. So it's done quite well, and that's why I'm confident enough to shift over these expenses. And we were also able to purchase a $20,000 beverage cart out of the food and beverage revolving fund in cash over the winter. And so we have a new one that we got at the end of last season. So it's very self-sustaining, and we're hoping. I think it's possible that we could have excess revenue compared to expenses of $50,000 to $80,000. Hopefully, if everything goes well. But I really feel that we're on track to do that.
That's great. I'm glad to hear that. That gives us a little bit of a sense. And it just made me think also, so as we shift these expenses and operating costs out of the overall golf operations or golf enterprise accounts, is there anything off the top of your head that you could share with us, you'd like to share with us, that you feel is a cost containment opportunity for savings in your operating budget?
As it relates to the food and beverage revolving fund?
Because now that you don't have to include food and beverage underneath all golf operations.
Sure.
You've now, what was being taken out of the food and beverage, out of the golf operations in order to maintain or address costs or expenses in the food and beverage area. Now that has its own enterprise account, its own revolving account, I should say. Is there anything just off the top of your head that you see as a value to you from an operating budget standpoint?
Shifting the costs and taking the burden financially off just the general golf budget is incredibly helpful for me, in that I'm able to portion off the costs that I think food and beverage is going to utilize, freeing up some space in the golf general budget and lowering our overall budget numbers, so that we can bring in enough revenue so that we can start to build up a retained earnings fund, so that we can start planning for larger improvements going forward. And that's really what I was really trying to do, was get our overall golf budget down, shift as many costs legitimately over to food and beverage. And then once we close out the fiscal year, we can have discussions next fall and say, hey, we had a great year, and these are my plans for the future, and I think this is where we're going to get the most bang for our buck, utilizing the funding that we have available.
That's terrific. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you. That does it for my questions. I will ask the committee members, my fellow committee members, if they have any follow-up. None. So we thank you for your time.
Thank you.
On this particular item. Okay. Is there, let's see, we've covered the revolving fund. We've covered your operating budget. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we let you go for the evening?
Just need some weather like this, and we're great.
Very good. Okay. Well, I'll keep our fingers crossed.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your time.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Next up on the agenda is law. So, without having to move, Chief of Staff, Todd, and Town Solicitor.
Thank you. Okay. So I think everybody here is fairly familiar with the role that the law office plays within the town. Provided a bit of a summary that takes a little more of a historical look back at the office, as well as the reorganization that took place in fiscal year 21. I'm just talking about some of the benefits of that. Being able to bring in a full-time assistant solicitor that year was really enabled us to enhance the representation that we keep in-house, as opposed to having to utilize outside legal counsel. We certainly still take advantage of that depending on the size of the matter or the type of litigation. And this year, the majority of the expenses have related to litigation around the Pearson Pool Rink facility. Looking into the future, that litigation continues, but again, having two full-time attorneys in-house has allowed us to kind of increase the substantive support that we provide to outside counsel, thereby reducing the expenses associated with that representation, because certainly the hourly rate is significant when compared to the in-house rate. Also looking into '23, anticipating bringing back the use of KP Law for purposes of the 40B appeal relative to the two projects on Washington Street. But again, having somebody with Attorney Huff's expertise, particularly around land use matters, being able to play a more active role in that litigation than perhaps the office would have played with just one full-time attorney in-house. The other major change and significant reduction that you may have noticed in the proposal for the last, I don't know how many years, at least as long as I've been here, and then before, we utilized Westlaw as our research software provider. This year, being mindful of funding availability and funding sources, Attorney Huff and I went out and researched other alternative options and what financial benefits might be associated with those changes. And we were able to negotiate with LexisNexis a 2-year contract at a reduced monthly rate, but also one that includes 6 months of free service and also includes additional services directly tied into our Outlook program, which has also recently been upgraded through BELD, that were not available through our Westlaw contract. So being able to realize a fairly significant savings in that department when our 3-year contract with Westlaw expires this August. The only increase that you'll see in the program is one that accounts for a step increase that Attorney Huff will be eligible for during the fiscal year, given the amount of time that she's been with us. Everything else is seeing a reduction, and I tried to kind of note the consistent reductions that we've seen year over year, just to give a sense of where these programs started and where we are now, and really making a concerted effort to save where we can and not buy just because we have the money to do so. We also have continued to fund certain professional development and dues obligations that Attorney Huff and I both have, and effectively each choosing one conference or one training program that we'd like to attend in the year, just to be mindful of the funding associated with those items. Our budget makes up 0.11% of the overall, and I truly believe that Attorney Huff and I have really worked hard to make the best use of those funds and continue to do that going forward.
Thank you. Okay. So I'm going to ask first Councilor Flaherty if she has any questions.
Excuse me.
No, I'm going to defer to Councilor Maglio, who I think has more.
Very good. And just as an aside, I do believe, and I apologize, I believe that today is a special day for Councilor Maglio. Happy birthday.
Oh, thank you.
Happy birthday.
Spending this evening with us here tonight. All right.
Oh,
But please.
what a way to celebrate.
All right.
Thank you. So, I do have some questions, again, to familiarize myself with some of this. You mentioned, well, let me just ask the question and then you can repeat if I missed it. So, legal services.
Mm-hmm.
What is that?
That's the $65,000 to fund any outside counsel, so any representation handled by an outside law firm on behalf of the town.
And is that something that we have on retainer, or is that something we go out and arrange because it's in response to legal challenges or issues?
The legal services of that nature are exempt from the procurement laws, so we don't have an obligation to go out to bid. And so we currently have contracts with 2 different firms. One is Davis Malm and one is KP Law, and those are just based on their experience in the type of litigation we're looking for to be handled or for us to be represented. We don't have a retainer with any of these firms. We pay on an hourly basis, which is a negotiated reduced rate compared to what they would charge their private clients.
Okay, thank you. So, one of the areas that I had a question, and I think further confused because you mentioned 2 full-time in-house attorneys.
Correct.
So who are the two full-time attorneys?
Myself and Attorney Huff.
So that's confusing to me because...
Is it because I said full-time and I don't do legal work full-time? Is that the...
Yes.
Certainly. So full-time in the sense that we both work a minimum 40-hour work week. I don't spend 100% of my time doing legal work, but I do spend a good chunk of it. So I am a full-time employee that also does legal work, and Attorney Huff is a full-time employee that exclusively does legal work.
Okay. So having two full-time employees in-house already who can work on these.
Yes.
So then I think my other question, because, and it may be related to that bridge role that you play.
Sure.
And so I don't know if I should just wait until we get to the mayor's office, to the administration. I can ask it and you can tell me that we can answer it later. But because when I look at the staffing positions in both this department and the administration, it looks like we are getting rid of some of the administrative kinds of positions. And so we are investing more in the higher level positions, being attorneys. And so given the amount of hours and time, I'm just wondering if you can walk us through how that results in efficient spending and value, given that your role is split between these two different, two different really major interests.
Sure. So prior to fiscal year 21, the law office was staffed with a full-time attorney. That was me. And there had been funding for a part-time administrative position. That position had been vacant. It was vacant when I started in July of 2018. And so at the time there was one physical body located in the law office. There was no administrative support or any paralegal support, and the only funding that was available for that support was part-time, for a part-time employee. Looking at fiscal year 21, and at the request of the mayor, combining the two positions and evaluating what the benefits of the combination would be, the only position that was zero funded, for lack of a better term, as a result of that, was that part-time administrative position. The positions in the mayor's office that have been unfilled were unfilled for separate reasons unrelated to the consolidation of the two. So we were able to take two high-level positions and combine them into one, resulting in a savings. At the time it was roughly $96,000 or $98,000. And the only position, that includes the elimination of that part-time clerical position. So Attorney Huff and I mail our own letters, we write our own cover letters. We don't really rely on much administrative support in that regard. And in the mayor's office, our invoices and our payroll gets processed as part of the mayor's office processing. Okay.
So basically it was consolidating a full-time professional position, attorney, solicitor, and an unfilled admin position, clerical, administrative, paralegal, I'm not sure what it was, but that unfilled position is what you're talking about.
That's right. So we transferred the part-time clerical funding, and then at the same time combined the chief of staff and town solicitor position, and that enabled us to create a full-time assistant solicitor without incurring any additional costs and instead realizing a significant savings.
Okay, I'm going to hold off for now. Sure. Thanks.
Okay. I really don't have any questions. I mean, I'm glad. I do see opportunity. I do see the fact that there have been reductions in a lot of various areas, And you have given us somewhat of an explanation of how administratively you have shifted around, and also through outsourcing some, such as LexisNexis, excuse me, that you've been able to leverage some opportunities to make up for that lack of director or a person doing the administrative work. So overall, just from a legal standpoint, where as you had stated, there has been some ongoing legal cases the town has been involved in on both sides of the legal line, the litigant or the plaintiff or the defendant. Do you see a possibility, and I know that you have cited before that due to the confidential nature of ongoing negotiations or hearings or scheduled hearings, do you see any of these a reduction or a settlement without getting into specifics? Do you see any opportunities as we look out over the year, or is that still more or less working its way through the legal opinions, the back and forth, the appeals, etc.? Do you see anything exhausting itself to a point where, okay, you've exhausted all legal options?
Yeah. I think there is certainly potential for some of the litigation to resolve in fiscal year 23, whether that's through dispositive motion or mutual resolution or judgment. It's hard to speak any more specifically than that. We are, the Holland, I call it the Holland Project, the 40B litigation, we have literally just filed complaints. We were waiting on materials to effectuate service, and then I would expect, given the volume of the record associated with that case and the backlog that some of our state agencies and our courts have seen, it could be several months before we are actively engaged in that litigation as far as filing briefs. That's just the nature of how that litigation will proceed. It will be solely on the record. With the other matter, we are at nearing the end of discovery, and the next phase would be dispositive motions, which again would be briefs that would be then argued by the court. And again, the wheels of justice don't move quickly.
No.
I don't think that's exactly the expression, but I think you get what I'm saying. And at the same time, we've kept all of the planning and ZBA-related appeals in-house. We handled a significant volume of school-related litigation, all in-house, and that's because there were two of us here able to do that, and so we were able to spread some of that responsibility and work amongst ourselves.
Okay. So so that's right, that you would have not only just what you would see as an outside party against the town, but also internally there are some departments that I think, just through the nature of their ongoing operations and the type of services that they provide, that you will find lower level litigations that still require the attention of the community. And in your case, this would buffer your argument that the in-house law is helping us from a cost perspective versus shipping these out.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Yes. So, additional question from Councilor Flaherty.
If the town were to lose or alternatively win a court settlement, where would we pay that money from in the budget if it were a loss? And where would it go if it were a win? So it depends. So there's a whole nother category of litigation that we don't talk about, we don't fund, because it's covered under one of our insurance policies. So
a lot of the times, the type of litigation that comes with significant financial damages, for example, a slip and fall, or, damage to a vehicle as a result of hitting a pothole, excessive force through the police department, those types of matters are all covered within our insurance policy. So once we meet the deductible, our obligation financially to those matters is resolved. We continue to have representation assigned through Maya, and any damages that are awarded in the course of those matters get paid under our insurance policy. If there was a matter that was not covered by insurance that had financial implications associated with it, the town would have to fund any damage award that was issued against it. In the alternative, there are also cases where the town the town could either initiate litigation, or it could file a cross-claim or counterclaim in existing litigation seeking damages in the same form. We have the same legal rights to seek monetary damages as any private citizen would, maybe not exactly the same, but generally the same. And if monies in that regard were to come in, they would likely go to the general fund. If they were earmarked, let's say, for example, we were awarded attorney's fees in a case, we would have a record of exactly how much we paid in attorney's fees, and the money could be used to replenish that account. I think would probably be the best example.
Okay, so if you don't want to proceed this way, we don't have to, because I see that Director Spellman just left. But because you mentioned insurance, and because I noted that in the finance department there is an increase in our insurance policy, that was precisely what I was wondering about. There's a 12.4% increase in our insurance policy, which is not insignificant, and I was curious to know if there's a relationship between how we have fared in court and how our insurance has gone up, or if it's due to something else.
So the insurance typically sets they have kind of a range that has generally been in the 10 to 12% increase range, and Director Spellman can speak more to this, but they do a 3-year look back of claims. And so they do a 3-year look back to kind of evaluate and assess what the new rate should be, and that's what they set for the following year. But it has always been with kind of in that same 10 to 12% range since I've been involved anyway. And they look at all claims. They look at motor vehicle related claims, property damage claims, litigation. So they across the board review all claims filed through the town, and then they make a proposal which we often then try to negotiate down.
Okay, well, if Director Spellman has something he'd like to add to that, we can ask him later. That's what I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we'll put a pin in that.
Sure.
When Director Spellman comes back. All right, so let's move on then, unless there are any further questions. And I'm remiss in asking the town auditor, please, at any time, I know you'd raise your hand if you feel you'd like to have a question or seek clarification.
I am not bashful, thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, so I don't think we have any further questions as it pertains to law. So we can move on then to the mayor's office. Okay, so again, we'll start with if we've had an opportunity to review the summaries and look at the numbers, so I will ask the committee members for questions they may have, starting with Councilor Flaherty.
In the mayor's office, this is more a point of curiosity than anything else, but in the mayor's office, the project manager IT position was eliminated. And instead, in order to ensure the continuation of important technology-related projects, including Munis implementation, the funds were used to cover the cost of technical support to the town. So, because Munis implementation is specifically cited in this, I just need to know how close are we to completing Munis implementation?
Okay. So I I'm going to ask that we hold for Director Spellman. I didn't bring my specific dates, and I don't want to misremember, but I think we have 2 additional phases left to implement, and we have dates set for those. I'm just going to keep talking until he sits down about Munis implementation and where we are in the current implementation process. Oh, he's not listening. And the specific dates for those going forward. We lost the individual that held the full-time position, and then we maintained him on a temporary contract basis, and we were able to tap into that for continued support. When he left and that contract expired, we continued to rely more heavily on support of BELD and also of Munis personnel for the training. But Ed, could you talk a little bit about where we are as far as the Munis implementation and what the next major milestones are for us?
The last 2 phases of Munis that we're in the process of implementing now is the water, sewer, stormwater, which the conversion is planned for the beginning of June. The first billing in June for the month of July for fiscal year 23 is scheduled to be in Munis. And then the last component is dealing with the tax title from the real estate for the delinquent taxes, and the schedule is for that to be done for June 30th to roll over into the next fiscal year for July 1. We went live with payroll on January 1st, beginning of the calendar year for the first payroll in January would be set for our calendar year 2022. And prior to that, we went live with real estate, motor vehicle excise, and general ledger.
So the last portion of the last phase will be done by the end of this fiscal year?
Correct.
Great. So I guess what I'm interested in learning is once that's done, where will these funds be directed that support it?
So the mayor's office program doesn't have any funding anymore for those services. That's been zeroed out. It was zeroed out last year as well. So that staffing is not reflected in the budget. The only salaries reflected in the mayor's office budget are the mayor, the chief of staff and town solicitor, the services coordinator, and the assistant to the mayor.
So we don't have any IT management in town?
We have a contract with BELD that provides for IT support services.
And they do it town-wide?
Correct.
Okay.
That position specifically was project management of Munis. So it wasn't town-wide project management or IT management.
I'm just, maybe you can smooth my thinking out.
Okay.
But because I have 2 kids in the schools, and because the schools are entirely dependent on technology now, especially the internet, I can't help but, understand my son's frustration when he tries to connect to the internet at Braintree High School for an entire class period and just can't do it. And then my daughter, who has a perfectly fine Chromebook but can't connect to the internet in her science classroom for some reason, and every other student has the same problem in her science classroom, so the teacher has been given a raft of school Chromebooks, which for whatever reason that nobody understands, or at least my 13-year-old daughter can't explain to me, that set of Chromebooks does connect to the internet, but then they get borrowed by students and removed, and not returned to the science classroom, which means now the science teacher only has 5 Chromebooks for the entire class, and it's a problem. And so what I'm looking for is who is responsible for IT management in this town, because it is, I know I'm speaking anecdotally because that's the information that I have, but I don't know who's taking care of that.
So I don't believe BELD does the IT for the schools. The schools manages their own technology in-house, and then the town, and I guess I should say town-wide with the exception of the schools. The town facilities, the town email, the town intranet, the town servers, those all run through BELD through the contract that we have for services. So if the issues are school-specific, I can let the superintendent know that that's an item we'd like to discuss next week when they're here.
I think that's a great idea.
Sure.
I certainly do want to discuss it when we get to the schools, but I guess for now, I will just move on.
Okay.
Very good. Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. Do we have questions from Councilor Maglio?
Yes. So this kind of goes back to what I was asking before. And you know what would be helpful for me is to understand the full-time equivalent positions. So the FTEs, how that has changed in the mayor's office and in the law office, and I will have the question too, around finance. I'm just getting a sense of how many bodies are in there for 40 hours a week or a subset of that.
Sure. So for a minimum, I'm going to say 40 hours a week.
Well, what they're being paid for are 40 hours a week.
So bodies. It's myself as the Chief of Staff and Town Solicitor. Assistant Solicitor Crystal Huff. And her salary is in the law program that we just discussed. You have the mayor. You have the assistant to the mayor, Steve Leary. And you have the services coordinator, Kate Naughton. Those are the bodies.
Okay. That makes sense. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And those are all full-time positions?
Correct.
And there's no part-time positions?
No.
Okay. And there were 2 other positions.
So in the law office, before Attorney Huff, there was the town solicitor, and there was a part-time administrative clerical position. I've been here since July of 2018. That position has been unfilled since I've been here, that part-time position.
When did that leave the budget?
So that position used to be a licensing coordinator, and when the previous licensing coordinator left, the responsibilities were bifurcated. Half of the responsibilities were transferred to the clerk's office, as was the funding, and the other half remained in the law office, and the position was never filled. So in fiscal year 2021, as part of the reorganization, the admin clerical was zeroed out, and the line for the assistant solicitor was enhanced, because there used to be a part-time assistant town solicitor. I can't believe I forgot about John. He worked 19 hours a week at the time. I completely forgot about him.
Okay. And in that position, then that morphed into
we can call it Crystal's position. The funding for the part-time assistant solicitor and the part-time administrative clerical were combined to allow for a full-time, fully licensed attorney.
Okay.
My apologies, I completely forgot.
Okay, it makes sense
Yes.
now.
Yes.
Thank you.
Sure.
I'm good.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. I see here also from the mayor's office there has been some deductions, decreases in overhead. You've taken a look at a lot of those things. Let's see. The printing of forms, reduction of 50%. Can you give me a sense of what exactly you targeted for those reductions?
So the printing program typically goes, I actually ran a year-to-date here, typically goes to things like business cards, letterhead, etc. And we currently have a strong enough supply of those items that we don't anticipate needing to place an order in the next fiscal year, which is what enabled us to make that reduction.
500. Okay, thank you. Excuse me. And office supplies, $300, I can imagine. Again, it's just a little bit of the tightening of the belt. let's see, there was another one I saw here that, advertising, for example. What are some of the items that, I've seen here you took a significant reduction last year, over 37%. This year you're adding another 18% cut. Are you using other means of advertising? What is it that, are you shifting it to other departments? Just kind of out of curiosity.
Sure. So I think we talked about this last week with another department. It's hard to predict what the advertising costs are going to be. This year we have placed 3 legal advertisements funded out of this program. 2 were zoning amendments and 1 was an RFP. And just trying to project forward as best we can what we're anticipating in the coming year, knowing that with, for example, the master plan steering committee in progress, you'll likely see less and less zoning specific amendments because those will go at a later date. Same thing for kind of sale. We just published the sale of Foster School, but we've been able to lean on a different department to help support the costs associated with that advertising and publication. So it's looking at prior year spending really and forecasting. That's an area where we can support a reduction.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. And that really is all the questions I have as far as the mayor's budget goes, the mayor's department goes. So I'll just ask again if there's any additional questions from the committee members before we move on.
And in the unlikely event that John Goldrosen is watching, my sincere apologies for forgetting about him because he was fantastic also.
Sean was excellent. He was excellent. Okay, so we'll move now on to the finance program. And we'll start questions from committee members on this item. Yes.
Thank you. We're good. Thank
Director Spellman, is there a question?
I had my hand raised. So
I'm sorry, I did not see that.
That's okay.
You had your hand raised. Are we going back to the mayor's office?
Yeah, I just...
Okay, I stand corrected. We are not done with the mayor's office, and I'd like to give you that opportunity, Mr. McGoldrick, to ask your question.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to comment on Councilor Flaherty's question about school technology. I know it's not school night, but I just pulled up the budget. And the school does have a tech department with almost a $1.8 million budget. So again, making assumptions, I would assume that a lot of that work for school technology is done out of that school education budget.
I'm sorry. I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Sorry. Close contact. Out of that school operating budget, $1.8 million has it under technology department. So my assumption is that out of that $1.8 million, there are costs built in to help technically support the school for their IT. That's just my assumption based on the description of the program.
Thank you. Okay, moving then on to finance. I'm going to ask Councilor Flaherty, if she has any questions.
Thank you. One of the questions that I had is to do with the OPEB contribution, which we have identified as $377,500. So I did a look back at where we were with OPEB over the years, and the trend that I saw historically is that we were building it incrementally. We started with fairly small contributions in 2011, 0.14 million, and then we built up until our highest contribution was in 2019 at 1.3 million. And then in 2020 we dropped to 0.75 million, and then we didn't fund it at all for 2 years, and now we are looking at $377,500, which puts us on the map for a contribution. But it's so small, and considering that the OPEB costs are rising, I saw today a figure showing that we were basically 6.4% funded for OPEB liability. So I guess my question is this. It was also noted to me that $377,500 was the same amount that we took out of the budget last year, and this year it's been replaced in that line. And I just want to know the process that was used to arrive at that figure. How did we decide that that was the amount that we should put in?
A little bit of history back in fiscal year 2010. We started with the council adopted and established an OPEB trust.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, the actuarial liability was at $14,500,000. What we did was to take 1% of that, or $145,000, was the beginning of the starting point. And what we were trying to do was each year increase that by $145,000. So in 2019, you had roughly $1.3 million. Had it stayed on track in 2020, it would have been $1,450,000, basically a 10-year increase of the $145,000. Over the last few years, that account had been decreased to provide support for other line items. $377,000 was in the budget originally for last year, and that was half of the approximately $750,000 that was in the prior year's budget. And then the council had made a change was made to transfer those funds from the OPEB line into the school department budget for fiscal year 2022. So when we started to build the budget, the starting point was I could use the previous year's $377,000 as the basis for the line item for this year for fiscal year 2023.
Okay. If we fund it at this rate, this year and in the coming years, will we ever get where we need to go with OPEB?
Yes, eventually. The long-term plan, the pension system is on track to be fully funded by fiscal year 2023. What will happen is in fiscal year 2030, did I say? Oh, I'm sorry, 2033. Thanks.
Get aggressive.
2033, the pension system is scheduled to be fully funded. What will happen in fiscal year 2034 is that pension appropriation will drop significantly. And the plan is to take the difference in the 34 appropriation from the 33 and add that into this OPEB line item. And it's a significant amount of money. I'm drawing a blank on it right off the top of my head. But from 2034 to, 2034 over the next 10 to 12 years, that increased appropriation will get us close to being fully funded for OPEB after we've fully funded our pension appropriation. And what this does, the $377,000 is a start to go back to funding our OPEB liability for the general fund.
Okay. It's a small start, but I guess you have to start somewhere. So I will move on from that. I had asked a question concerning, while you were out of the room, I had asked a question concerning insurance. And we've seen an increase in insurance this year, but we've seen increases in insurance most years. And this year is 12.4%. I don't know if that is how that compares because I haven't done the percentage math on the other years. What drives the insurance increases?
There are two things in this year's budget that drive the increases. One is a projected increase of, they've given us an estimate of 8 to 10% on our overall insurance. And the primary driver for that is past claims. We've had several significant claims at the school department dealing with the electrical panel and the water damage there. And then also the prior damage, there were 2 school roofs that were damaged and replaced. and to the tune of approximately $3.5 million for, was it South Middle School and
Yeah.
Ross School?
South and Ross.
And then the second component is there were two buildings that were currently vacant, and the insurer took those off of our policy, and we had to go out and get separate policies for the two buildings that are currently vacant, the Foster School and 90 Pond Street.
Did we return east to the ledger too, regarding staff?
And the town's in the process of selling the Foster School so that that would come off, and we're looking at alternatives for the 90 Pond Street.
Okay. So I had thought perhaps one of the primary drivers had to do with how we fared in court, but it sounds like what's really happening that's driving our increases has to do with cataclysmic events happening in our capital infrastructure.
Correct. Several catastrophic claims, yes.
Catastrophic claims. Okay. The third question that I had has to do with the reserve funding.
Okay.
It looks to me like when you add up all the money that we have in the reserve funding in finance, but also over in HR, that we have about enough money to cover town employment, cost of living increases, or contractually negotiated salary increases if what we negotiate is about a 1% increase. What is the town's plan if a 1% increase is not found to be acceptable by the unions, and what the final negotiated arrangement is greater than that?
So the town is in the middle of negotiating all of its contracts, as we know. So I'm not going to speak specifically about what percentage the town is or isn't inclined to offer in the course of those negotiations. But the budget sets forth parameters for what we can afford. And that is a position that we go into negotiations with, and that's a position we've been very honest about with the representatives. If the terms that are put forward, or if we're unable to reach an agreement with any of the unions, it would follow the traditional path of going to an impasse and next steps at the Department of Labor Relations. But I'm hopeful that we don't have to get there.
Okay, let me try to generalize my question. In any given year, if the cost of contractually negotiated labor is greater than anticipated, where does the town go to fund the additional amount of money necessary?
Free cash.
Free cash.
Or supplemental transfers from other departments, but generally free cash.
I mean, all of our reserves are empty, so it would have to be free cash, right?
Well, so it could be treated like any other supplemental. So you could do, like we've done the last 2 years, you could do an analysis of year-to-date expenditures in the other departments, and rather than just doing a full 100% transfer from free cash, you could make transfers from other programs. If departments have monies that they don't anticipate spending or needing from whatever moment in time that is to year-end, you could do departmental transfers in addition to a free cash transfer.
I mean, theoretically.
Yeah.
Yes. I don't think in practice we could do that in Braintree, but in theory, yes, I agree. That's what I have. I'm sure the other counselors have more, and if I think of something else, I'll let you know.
So the
Yes.
Chair?
Mr. Spellman.
One of the programs in the finance is the information technology. And what I'd like to do is introduce Jim Boyle. He's the IT director over at Bell, and they provide the IT services to the town. And if it's your pleasure, I'd ask him to come up to the table and just kind of give an overview of Bell, the IT services they provide, and some of the things he's working on with us in the town and with the town auditor and the firm of CLA.
Thank you. I don't think I'd have an issue. I'd just ask if my fellow counselors are okay, committee members are okay with that?
Certainly. I enjoy.
Okay, very good.
Welcome, Mr. Boyle. Good to see you again. Pull it up close so we can hear you.
All right. Thanks for having me. Director Spellman just wanted me to go through a couple of different things and the services that we provide to the town. Obviously, it's IT support. I'm sure all of you have worked with one of or many members of my staff, if not me directly. So day-to-day help desk, network and operations infrastructure, security operations. We recently launched this year, which I'm sure you all took, security awareness training. The cybersecurity insurance paperwork and application has gone from, I don't know, half a page to about 5 pages now, which is a real fun to fill out once a year. So they ask about security awareness training, simulated phishing exercises, things of that nature. Through CLA this year, we're actually doing an internal penetration test and vulnerability assessment of our internal network. The past 2 or 3 years, we've done external penetration tests to see, what's out on the web that, attackers or people could get through and, do damage to the town. So a lot of my day is security, research, reading on the internet, threats, updating, making sure clients are updated, servers are updated. We only expose things that need to be exposed. That way we don't leave a lot of holes wide open. We did an audit, us and the schools, about 3 years ago now. And one of the things was security policies and procedures put around day-to-day operations. And that's what we've actually, Beld has hired a virtual CISO because no one can afford them in the municipal space. They're a hot commodity in the private sector. So we work with him weekly, develop policies, procedures. One of the big ones that everyone has signed or acknowledged is the acceptable use policy, which basically says, hey, these things are acceptable for uses for town technology. It sets a guideline so our end users and employees can understand, what to use it for. And that's, kind of it in a nutshell. We're actually working right now, we're going live with it. We've been helping the police go live with their new RMS project. That's going live tomorrow. My staff has been pretty tied up with it for the past couple of months, and they're looking forward to get it off their plate. I know the police are very excited to get the new piece of technology up and running for use. So, Munis implementation, we work very closely with Ed's team, Barbara Wall specifically, launching the couple phases of Munis that we've had, and we're working pretty diligently right now on the water and trash billing. So. And that's about it.
Okay.
At a very high level.
What's that?
At a very high level, that's about it.
Okay. Well, I'm going to just jump in and just ask a quick question here before I ask my fellow committee members. So the services that you provide, from when I say you, I mean Beld. We know that once a year there is an agreement that is reached, there is a payment that is agreed upon, and then there are services rendered for that said payment from the town to Beld. And essentially, we're all familiar, and as you stated at the beginning of your comments, that we're all, at one way or another, have had interaction with you or your staff for those services and how they've been rendered to us as individual users, also understanding network as well as support, infrastructure support in terms of servers, and then of course security. You oversee you're essentially the security officer for the town.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. The town and Beld. Yep.
Great. So, in your capacity of supporting Munis, are you, Munis provides its own vendor support.
That's correct.
Right?
Yep.
So, your role in that application support, is it, I know that there's a dividing line from an IT specific
of where this is a vendor responsibility or this is a network or a connectivity issue. That connectivity issue would be yours, I'm assuming.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so backup, connectivity, anything application-specific related, that falls under Munis and the support agreement with them.
Okay. So are you providing some type of a service in the rollout also of Munis?
No.
None at all. So when you made mention to Munis, what you were actually saying is up to the certain point you provide support.
Yeah, so spinning up the servers that it takes, making sure the backups are configured and working correctly.
Right.
Locking down so you just can't hit it from anywhere.
Okay.
Things of that nature.
Okay, thank you.
So the infrastructure side of it.
Got it. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I'm going to ask if there's any questions from my fellow committee members of Mr. Boyle.
Not a question.
Council Flaherty?
Just a comment. I read your newsletters on security and how I find the language understandable, and I think you might be single-handedly responsible for certain upgrades in my own house, so thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. No, I'm glad to hear it. I've been getting a lot of really good feedback from it. Like most things, when an IT guy sends out an email, people don't read it, so that makes me feel good and like I'm making a difference. So I really do appreciate that.
That's all. I don't have questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Council Flaherty. Council Maglio.
Thank you. I don't have a question either. I would echo Councilor Flaherty's comments, and thank you for the information and the support that we get and how we're able to stay connected.
Thank you very much.
One last question, if I may. So you had made mention earlier about working in cooperation with CLA and their services in testing internal, and I think you also said external at one point?
Yep, we do an annual external pen test just to see if there's any holes out in the network that, hackers could exploit. And we get a report and we judge the risk versus the reward of keeping it open, and then we make a decision on closing it or keeping it open.
Okay. And I recently, the council recently, I'm going to say maybe a month and a half, 2 months ago, we had a presentation from the Massachusetts National Guard. And they have a couple of units now that are cybersecurity specific. I also had a follow-up opportunity to attend, along with Superintendent Lee, a presentation they had given to community officials, not just the town of Braintree, but area community officials at the local Braintree Army National Guard Armory on the types of services that they provide, or I should say the services that they are responsible for from a war fighting, but a national security, but also the Adjutant General had pointed out how they are now offering some of their expertise, not in the form per se of providing costly services for free, but more or less assessment services, as well as willingness to participate in some types of security penetration testing or just even assessments.
Yes.
Is that something that your department or that you yourself have expressed some interest in? Or?
I haven't heard of the National Guard one, but we're signed up with CISA, the U.S. government agency. I think it's a division of DHS. For information sharing purposes, the election ISAC, the electricity ISAC, MS ISAC, they're a dime a dozen as far as information sharing people, and my inbox gets crowded with the same thing a lot. But it's all great information, and I'd be interested in seeing. I'm never going to say no to free
some of
stuff.
That information. Yeah, I can work through. I can work directly with Beld.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Okay. Terrific. And just lastly, we all know that information security, cybersecurity, is really paramount now to the security posture of a municipality. We know that it has impacted lots of private businesses. It's now spilling over in some cases, significant ways, with other communities
where there has been ransomware and there has been ransoms paid due to an exploitation of a municipality or a state system, IT system. So as part of the readiness, preparedness, and I don't know, the Chief of Staff might have some insights into this as well, that I know that there are exercises that are conducted periodically with our civil defense as well as with regional public safety for contingency, disaster recovery, various things of that nature. Do you have a seat at that table? Are you ever part of any conversations of assessment?
Not locally here, but I have done exercises up at MITRE, just being part of critical infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
We had the T was there. They did that really nice roundtable exercise. We went through our response plans, including our cyber response plan in relation to NERC, which is the governing body for electric utilities.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a great exercise. And we actually just did an internal incident response tabletop about a month ago, and we took some good takeaways out, and we're going to make some adjustments to our incident response plan. And I like to do at least one of those a year, hopefully two. It really depends on scheduling and whatnot. So,
okay, that's great. And I certainly, I mean, I think Chief of Staff Taub, I don't know if that kind of scope of thing yet is the civil defense has gotten to that type of a thing, or it's just by the nature of what it does. It's more physical stuff, more real tangible here on the ground.
Yeah, my understanding of the large-scale exercises have been more active shooter, physical violence training for police and fire and EMS, not necessarily to the level of the cyber attack.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Just from a clarity standpoint. Mr. Boyle, I really appreciate your time, and thank you, Director Spellman, for giving us this opportunity to have this conversation. So I think we're pretty much all set with you, Jim.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, take care.
See you.
Now getting back to finance, more finance specific, some of the topics.
Sure.
Did you have some questions that you wanted to ask still on finance? Okay. Julia? Okay. So I'm going to recognize Councilor Flaherty. She does have one more follow-up question.
Let Councilor Maglio go.
Okay. Councilor Maglio, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Hi.
Hey.
So I have a couple, I think, of pretty simple questions. And by simple, I mean pretty easy answers. Let me just go through. The other night at a different hearing that I don't recall at this point what it was. It could have been when Nicole gave the list of grants that were included in perhaps last year. And I'm wondering, there's a list of grants in your paperwork on page 5. Is that the list that you were referring to?
That's the list, and that list is also posted on the website for public access, and I was planning to provide it another time to the committee in response to the questions, just rounding out the responses from last week's hearing.
Excellent. Okay, so this was really interesting and helpful to get. There were a couple of questions I had about them on here, just clarification, and I'm wondering if I could ask that now, or if that's a different...
Happy to try to answer the questions. If it's department specific, we may just have to go back to that department head, but...
Okay, I think they're pretty straightforward. Both, I think essentially the Smith Beach Green Infrastructure Project, stormwater, I believe that was for a consultant. That's on page 6. And then a couple above that, the Municipal ADA Improvement Planning Grant, Public Health, $50,000, Office on Disability. I believe that also was for a consultant, right?
The ADA was for the International Center of Human Design to come in and provide consulting and advising services to complete the transition plan. I'm not as confident about Smith Beach, but we can certainly find out. DPW, including stormwater, will be here Wednesday evening. We can confirm that.
That sounds good. And then I had a question about just in terms of numbers of employees in the finance department, and it looks like there's 6. There's between the treasurer and collector, but I don't know if I'm reading this correctly.
If I can direct you to tab L, beginning on page 5, you'll see the Finance Department Administration.
I did not go to tab L. Okay.
In the Finance Division, there's a total of 17 full-time employees. In the Finance Department, there's myself as the Finance Director, and then the Grant and Procurement Contractor. That's Lorraine C. And she's the one that works with the departments to obtain the grants that are listed in the pages 5 to 7. If you go on to page 6, under the accounting office, there's the town accountant, Mark Lynn, and then there are 3 administrative clerical people. There's a supervisor and then 2 clerical positions in the ASME union. On page 7 in the assessor's office, there's 3 full-time. There's the director of assessing, and then 2 administrative personnel. And then down at the bottom, there are 3 part-time assessors that receive a stipend. Going on to page 8, the treasurer collector's office, there's the treasurer collector. There's an assistant treasurer collector. There are 3 clerical positions in the tax collector's office. And on the treasurer's side, there are 2 primarily payroll people, and then there's a treasury accountant that handles the recording and reconciling of the cash receipts for the treasurer's office.
Excellent, thank you. And how has your staff grown or shrunk over the years, in the past maybe 2 years?
There's been no change to
No
the
change?
to the number of staff, no.
Okay. In terms of the grant writing, can you direct me to that page in tab L? That's 5.
On page 5?
That's the administrative clerical?
Yes.
Okay, so that's the grant writer. So,
Grant and procurement, she also handles the procurement for the town, making sure the bids are properly put out to bid, advertised in the procurement process. And they work with the town solicitor's office and reviewing and approving all the contracts before they're finally signed and executed.
okay. So, and I know that it's been mentioned a few other times, in terms of the coordination and integration and people kind of sharing their expertise to help build robust grants and proposals. I'm just curious, that is a huge job that one person has, but there's no support staff or anything built into this budget.
Not directly in the finance program. She works with the various other departments. There are specific people in the police department that she works with in applying for specific federal police grants, state police grants.
But everybody does this as part of as sort of a little extra to what they're doing for their main job, other than her. She's the only one who's absolutely focused on this.
On grants and procurement.
On grants and procurement. And okay. Has it always been that way? Like, how long have we had this position?
I mean, it's, again, Ed has a longer look back than I do, but for a fairly significant period of time, and in my experience, when Ms. C was hired, she actually rededicated a portion of her focus to grants, whereas previously it was very procurement focused. And what she's done, I think, is expanded the grant component of her responsibility and also empowered and educated individual departments to do a fair bit of that on their own as well, so that we're really broadening our reach for what we're submitting for.
Okay, it's impressive that it's one person that is doing the lion's share of this kind of work, and I know that there's support that she gets from the other departments, but the pressure's on her.
She does a great job on both the procurement and the grant side.
Okay. Thank you. I don't think I have any other questions.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Flaherty, I know that you said that you would like to revisit the opportunity to ask some questions.
Indeed, thank you. It's not a huge amount of money, I just want to know what it is. We have 2 lines in the budget that are marked revaluation. One is under administration and the other is under assessing. And the one in assessing is a very steady number, it's $94,000 every year. And the other one fluctuates more, and I just want to understand what those are for.
In the assessor's budget, the revaluation, every 3 years the town's required to go through a revaluation process through the state where they come out and review the town's records. Basically, this revaluation is dealing with the property valuation of the real estate and personal property accounts in the town. The town goes out to bid every 3 years for a contract for a revaluation company. And the current contractor is Patriot Properties. And they go out each year, review new properties, go out. They work with the building department. They get the copies of the building permits that are issued, and then when the final ones are approved, they go out and review the property. If there's new businesses, new activity in town, they'll go and add that information to the assessor's records, and that's how we deal with the calculation of coming up with the new growth and development in the community. An example will be when the Allen Street is ultimately sold and the property is turned over to the developer. It's currently owned by the town and is tax exempt. When it's sold, it will become a taxable property and will be put back onto the town's tax rolls.
So it's a contractual service that they provide to assess new or changed properties?
Correct, and the goal is ultimately every 3 years we have to submit the information to the state and have that the values and values approved.
They do the work every year, but we submit once every 3 years?
We're required every 3 years to go through that process with the state, yes.
Okay.
And on the finance side, the revaluation, what that $10,000 is set aside for, the town is required to have a OPEB valuation done every 2 years, and this is the cost for the actuary to provide that, to do that update.
Okay, so then that's separate from the OPEB actuarial line that's somewhere else? Where do I see that?
The revaluation line in the finance program, it's 576001. That's the $10,000 for
Yeah.
the OPEB valuation.
Okay, I think that gets it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. All right, couple of questions for you. I think I understand. I just wanted to hear your take on this. On the consultant line item, I certainly understand that due to the absence and the medical leave of our assistant assessor, Mr. Brinkman, that you had to bring someone else in order to perform the function to a level that was required, leadership in the department, et cetera. And the number of the monies that you've used in the past from a consultant's standpoint has been a really low figure, relatively low figure, and naturally when you have an $8,000 increase, or excuse me, a $26,000 increase, that reflects probably a good part of the upcoming fiscal year of requiring that backfill. Is that correct?
Correct. The $8,000, that covers basically two services that are performed. We have a student activity audit, review done every year.
Mm-hmm.
The statute requires that student activity accounts be reviewed every 3 years, and we're on a rotating schedule where we have the high school done, then east and south, and then we go back in year 4 to the high school.
Okay.
So we're on a rotating schedule for that. And then the other service is to provide a pension report that's required for our CAFR, but also for the other departments, for BELD and their audit, and then also the Housing Authority for their federal audit. So that's the other main report coming out of this consultant line.
Okay, great. Again, it's just a 229% increase does require a question and clarification, and you've answered that specifically, so thank you. The other line item is in the reserve. You have an increase of 244% over the current year's budget. So this year you'll have a balance of $604,000 and pretty much $605,000. So can you talk to me a little bit about that one?
We had started with the base amount, $175,000. In addition to that, we increased some funds to set aside for future salary increases.
Got it.
Once the contracts are settled, we will come back to the council and ask for the council to transfer funds from these reserves to the various salary and wage line items.
That makes sense. Thank
you. These things happen generally every 3 years.
Right.
The contract year.
Okay.
The contracts aren't approved, and we set funds aside, and next year, if all the contracts are settled, when the budget documents and instructions go out, we'll ask the departments to put in the contractual salary increases and any steps or lane changes for the various departments. Sure.
Yep. Familiar with that. So thank you. That was a very good explanation. You've answered my question. And then just tied into that here on the summary you've given us is an administration number on the departments and program. This.
Okay.
Okay. Under administration, we do see an increase of $447,000 under administration line item, and I'm assuming that is a roll-up of all of your sub-departments under finance.
The administration, the $447,000, the bulk of that is the increase in the 9C reserve for the contractual obligations.
Yeah.
In the accounting, that's primarily step increases. The assessing also step increases. The the technology, there were several decreases in a one-time Microsoft upgrade.
Yep.
There was some savings with the drop-off of the old software maintenance for the software system.
Yep.
General insurance was the increase that we had spoke about earlier. Treasurer collector, $377,500 of the $389,000 is the OPEB that was funded zero last year, $377,500 this year. Principal and interest on debt is an estimate based on projections I've done for the debt service for fiscal year 23. We have debt retiring each year. Some of the principal drops off each year, and also the interest. And with the new debt coming on, there's a slight increase in the debt principal on debt, but there's a decrease on the interest on debt.
Great. Okay. Now, and you've again, that was my assumption was here, just the way that you have described it, you validated the tie-in to the specifics of your overall department and the breakout amongst those different line items. So thank you. The last thing I have is on IT, SoftWrite. I know you had made a comment in your summary that the data processing, the line heads covered the town's old SoftWrite software maintenance contract. That's concluding next month. And will that also, does that tell me that SoftWrite is going to be retired at that point, or will you still maintain it just without the services?
Bells will still maintain it on a separate server that will only be accessible by the departments that would need it.
All right, for the preservation of historical data.
Correct.
Great, thank you. But in terms of, obviously you will not be paying a maintenance fee to SoftWrite. Are you currently paying a maintenance fee at a scale for Munis, or will that number, so I guess two questions. You must be currently paying some type of maintenance fee where you've already gone live with certain components of Munis.
Correct. On page 11 in the budget document, the information technology program, the third line from the bottom, it's titled maintenance. That's the Munis maintenance line item. And what's projected in there for this year, for 23, is $130,970, and that would provide the software for all of the applications for Munis.
Okay. And is that going to be, does that represent 100% now of maintenance? That's not a portion.
That's 100% correct.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that. And that pretty much is my questions at this point. There may be some additional questions from a finance specific perspective as we proceed through with some of the other departments. But at this point, my questions have been answered. I want to give an opportunity also to Mr. McGoldrick, if he has anything addition that may not have been answered by some of the councilors' questions, or if there's something still outstanding from your perspective.
No, I'm good. Thank you very much. Between all the councilors' questions and getting responses back for my own questions, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. So I'm going to ask my fellow committee members if there are any additional comments or questions concerning finance. Okay, great. So that concludes our operating budget questions that we have slated for this evening. I do want to note that under 2227, let me go back. Have we 2225? That was taken off the table. And there isn't any kind of action we need to vote on for 20... I'm sorry?
There are no other actions this evening other than to adjourn.
Okay, but as far as when we do have the appropriate departments here to discuss the additional items for revolving funds...
They will be brought forth with that department on the agenda.
From under 025.
Agenda, you see the golf
Yep.
was brought up.
Yep.
It has the red arc beside it.
No, I'm fully aware of what they are. I'm just asking the question. You've answered my question for me. Thank you. Okay. So, other than that, I'm going to give one more opportunity. If there's anything additional that we have not covered this evening that specifically any one of the committee members would like to address before we adjourn.
No,
None
thank you.
heard? Are there anything further from the Chief of Staff or from the Director of Finance?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll see you Wednesday evening with the DPW.
Very good. Okay. So do we have a motion to table
22025 to our next Ways and Means meeting on May 11th at 6 p.m.
that is the motion?
So moved.
Okay.
Second?
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good evening. Happy birthday, Councilor Magdale.
Thank you.
All right.